on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people, past, present and emerging. So today's panel, we are posing the question, do governance programs make a difference to people? For those of you involved in the world of governance and international development, you'll be well familiar with this question and the different levels of cynicism that surround it. We know that it's often hard to tell a compelling impact story about governance programs, not only because they're often about such exciting subjects as PFM and document delivery, but also because change is indirect, slow, politically contested, and rarely attributable to one actor or one factor. Governance work often improves rules, incentives, and relationships rather than delivering visible before and after outcomes. So the narrative link from activities to impact is inherently difficult to show. Governance programs aim at things like accountability, rule of law, ethereal subjects, public trust, effective public administration, and these are conceptually important but hard to observe and measure directly. Results usually materialise over many years and through incremental reforms. So by the time impacts appear, the original project, the staff, the funding cycle, maybe the donor have already moved on, and that can break the intuitive storyline. There's also the old attribution versus contribution kernel, and I won't go down that rabbit hole, but we know that stories either implausibly linear or they stay vague, and to avoid overclaiming or weakening their credibility. So in this world of messy and non-linear politics, governance change depends on power, incentives and informal norms, so that reforms advance, stall or backslide in cycles rather than in neat project log frames. So given all of that, for those of us who work in governance, you've kind of got one of two options. You can decide it's all too hard and go off and do the stuff where we can measure stuff that we feel comfortable measuring. Or we can go back to seeing what it is that we can do. What can we delineate? What can we qualify? What can we measure in a way? And what credible stories can we tell? So we took the latter path, and for today's panel, we're going to highlight the challenges and successes of governance programming in complex contexts and explore two different approaches to looking at research methodologies that can communicate the value and impact of these programs. And these are long-term programs. We're going to look at two. The Subnational Governance Program, SNGP, Australian-funded. They're both Australian-funded programs. This one's in Nepal. And the second one is the Governance for Resilience Program, Gov4Res, in the Pacific. And I'd like to welcome our panellists who work on these programs. I have to my right Carolyn O'Donnell, the Director of Impact from the Asia Foundation. And next to her is Dr. Jeevan Baniya, Deputy Director of Social Science Baha, a local research institute in Nepal. Online, we have, so far, we have Lisa, we have two people, fantastic. Oh, love it when the tech works. Dr. Apisalome Movono, the Associate Professor of Tourism and Sustainable Development at the University of the South Pacific, online in Fiji, and Lisa Buggy, who's the Strategy, Learning and Innovation Specialist on the Gov4Res project. So these are our four panellists today. So to begin with, we're going to give you a little bit of an overview and explanation of the programs themselves. To do that, I'll start with Carolyn, who's going to look at the SNGP program. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to introduce this program. I feel honored to represent my team based in Nepal, speaking about this program. It's one of the first governance programs that was implemented in Nepal following the new constitution in 2015. And it's gone through several adaptations and revisions since 2017 when we designed it in partnership with the DFAT. So, maybe we can get my slides up. So this project was originally designed as a 5-year project to support subnational governments transition from a unitary to a federal system. And it was designed to be implemented from 2017 to 2021. It's been extended to a second phase that will conclude in 2027. And it's primarily implemented through local partners, both non-governmental and governmental partners. So you can see we've worked with over 50 local partners, and we have several Government of Nepal counterparts that we work with. Oh, there you can see it. So why did we need this project? Nepal passed its constitution in 2015, which offered a major shift, unitary structure to a federal structure. Simultaneously, this shift also consolidated many of the smallest units of governance from more than 3,000 village bodies and over 35,000 wards to 753 local governing structures. These are mostly rural and urban municipalities. It also created 7 provinces that didn't exist before, shifting many of the administrative functions from what were 75 districts to now one of these 7 provinces or the 753 municipalities. Another major change that was offered was the authority to all 3 tiers of the governance system. So now all 3 tiers have executive, legislative, and judicial powers. And the goal of the new system is to bring the system, the services, everything that governance offers closer to the people. The funds, functions, and functionaries are now more devolved than they were before. At its core, the new constitution and the devolved system was meant to address historic exclusion, offering more opportunities both through elected positions and in terms of access to services to traditionally excluded groups, including gender and ethnic minorities. So to support this transition, the Subnational Governance Program worked in partnership with all 3 tiers of government to ensure an enabling environment for local governments who bear the greatest responsibility of service delivery and interaction with citizens. The overlap of jurisdictions and gaps in funding presented a risk to maintaining services for all Nepalis. Therefore, SNGP targeted the majority of its work to get closer to the vision of the Constitution and more inclusive governance in Nepal. This next slide is a little scary, but this is just the overall view of our theory of change. So the goal of the project over the last 10 years has been to promote an enabling environment for stable, effective, and inclusive subnational government in Nepal. This hasn't changed. So from the beginning, we've maintained this. What has changed has been our theory of change, has been some of our outcomes areas. So in order to create that, it was important that we worked with all 3 tiers of government and provide access to resources like technical advice, studies, technology, or even just platforms for dialogue that could help local governments act on their autonomy and respond to the needs and emerging issues. So what does the structure of our project look like? We have underpinning 2 fundamental outcome areas. One is stability and one is gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. So this stability feature of the program is focused on supporting mechanisms and systems for governance, particularly around intergovernmental relations, dispute resolution across 3 tiers of government, and policy. Our outcome that aims to improve gender equality and social inclusion takes a dual approach that has both very targeted GEDC activities as well as integration across all of our outcome areas. And with this, we found that the program needed to be anchored in technical areas as well, or sectors that we could use governance to deliver services. So we worked in health governance, economic governance, and more recently in climate governance. Each of these areas, we looked at funds, functions, and functionaries, drawing on the foundational elements like intergovernmental coordination and inclusion. And this approach proved to be more effective than working on intergovernmental coordination in a vacuum, for example. We work across all the provinces. We have strategic partnerships in 7 of the municipalities, and we work in 5 of the provinces, and then again we work at the federal level as well. I'm skipping a few of these slides to move to how do we integrate learning into our project. So the monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning team started as just 1 person, and it's now a 4-person team that is responsible for monitoring, assessments, learning, and knowledge management. The program has undergone 2 midterm evaluations and more than 15 internal assessments to look at specific issues, regularly monitoring and collecting data on at least 25 to 30 indicators over the life of the project. And that provides us both quantitative and qualitative information about the project. Last year, we joined a larger assessment with our Global Governance Unit and La Trobe University to look more closely at program impacts after 7 years of implementation. Some of the challenges that we faced as a governance project in a highly dynamic context, such as Nepal, is the constant changes in the context that make some activities relevant and render some irrelevant. And this is a challenge for monitoring and evaluation because you're constantly dealing with changing the activities and changing what we're measuring and where are we looking to see what's working and what's not. Developing coherent impact statements for the project has also been a challenge because it has shifted over the last 7 years. This project saw a number of massive changes, one being COVID at sort of the midpoint of the project, and we did a pretty significant pivot around that. And then much more recently, we saw the youth uprising, the Gen Z movement in September, which again presents another major contextual shift to constantly be responding to. And as Nicola mentioned, attribution and proportion of investment to results is another challenge. For us, we're using 7 partner municipalities to invest in and see what's working and what's not. How do you scale that to 753? It becomes a challenge to see what we can possibly achieve. So with that, I think I will conclude about the introduction of the Subnational Governance Program, and maybe we can hear from our next program.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yes, if we have Dr. Api and Lisa online, I'd like to hand over to them to do the presentation of the GovRes program. Lisa, do you want to go ahead?
Can you hear me okay in the room? Can you hear me okay in the room?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, colleagues. It's really a privilege to be joining online today from beautiful Fiji. I hear it's a nice day in Canberra. It's also a lovely day here in sunny Suva. My name's Lisa Buggy. I'll be just briefly describing the GovRes project before my colleague Dr. Movono takes forward the rest of the presentation during this panel. I will very briefly share my screen if you can. So quite similar in many ways to the Nepal program. I am part of the team implementing the Governance for Resilient Development in the Pacific project. We are a project who has also been programming for
Sorry
over
to
10
interrupt,
years.
Lisa. We're only seeing your PowerPoint, not the presentation.
So GovRes, in short, has also been programming for over 10 years in the Pacific. And similar to the Subnational Governance Program in Nepal, we've had the privilege of being able to, I guess, review and redesign the program now 3 times. So we're in the 3rd phase of programming this. And the program has definitely shifted across those 10 years as we've, I guess, learnt more and become a lot more sophisticated in, I guess, understanding what we're doing and the impacts that we're achieving. We currently program in 6 Pacific Island countries. That's Fiji, Tonga, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Tuvalu and Kiribati. The project is implemented through the UNDP Pacific Office in Fiji. That's where I sit with our team. And we also have a number of GovRes team members who are located in each of the countries that we implement in. The benefit of the longevity of the program is that we've actually also been able to leverage a number of donor partners across the 10 years. So the Australian government has provided support since the start. We are also now supported by the government of New Zealand, the government of Korea, United Kingdom and Sweden as well. And that's also allowed us to be able to continue programming until 2031, which I think is really important for a governance program in terms of maintaining the momentum and being able to really be iterative about the work that we do, and particularly and feeding that back into this program, even more complex for ourselves. It's not just a governance program, I guess, in the standard understanding of governance. We are very specifically about governance focused on strengthening resilience. And as part of that, we have two specific outcome areas. The first outcome area is really about institutional strengthening and systems reform. And we really do that by working from within governance systems, allowing our country partners to really design and lead the initiatives themselves. What that means for us is that our program looks very different across each of the countries that we work within, because of the contextually, I guess, appropriate and shaped design of what the country wants that kind of resilient strengthening to look like. Our second outcome is really around that behaviour change, and this has come about from a lot of our learning in terms of while governance work at that systems level is really important, a lot of these initiatives aren't sustainable without the associated kind of behaviour change or attitude change as well. So we've now become a lot more intentional, as I mentioned before, in terms of our learning, our communication and our advocacy as we implement the project. And so what that means is that we quite specifically now create spaces for that kind of learning to happen. That's both within the team and with our partners. We really make sure that we're nurturing the sharing and learning so that the specific decision makers and stakeholders that we work with can really actually shape those governance mechanisms in the way that's most appropriate. We work with central government agencies in a number of the countries, so ministries of finance and ministries of planning. We also work at a subnational level and with sectors, and then also with technical agencies, including ministries of women and ministries of climate change. And my colleague, Dr. Movono, will speak, I guess, specifically about some work that we're undertaking in Fiji around, I guess, change management that's happening. I think one of the things that has been critical for GovRes over the different phases of the program is that we have really come to identify that it's been quite difficult to communicate what we do as a project and how we do it and the results of that. And so I guess some of what we'll talk to on the panel today has been part of our learning and the ways we've kind of looking to hopefully make that communication a lot clearer in the future. So thank you so much, and I'll stop there.
Okay, excellent. Both of you have touched on this question, but we just want to dig in a little bit more into the issue of communicating what governance programs are doing. So I'm going to start with you, Carolyn. And from your perspective, what is it exactly that makes a governance program like SNGP so hard to explain?
Something we struggle with, I would say, daily. It really is a challenge. And I think it's not necessarily the program itself that is that complex, but it is certainly the context in which we're working that makes it really challenging to say, this is what we're doing across the board, because so much of what we do is tailored to the very specific context in which we're working. It requires acute awareness and adaptation, the ability to perceive what's working, what's not working, and sometimes that answer is we just don't know yet, or it's working here and it's not working there, and that's where we need to really explore, like, why is it working in one place and not somewhere else? It also requires systemic awareness and ongoing assessments to find out what people are thinking, what narratives are out there and shaping how people perceive governance. It also requires a sense of humility and flexibility and a toolkit of various approaches that could work. One particular challenge for Nepal was looking at our influence on systems. So when we opened up this idea of doing some research with La Trobe, we wanted to say, okay, we have a 10-year project that's working on governance. How has the system changed? And one of the challenges was that the system of governance in Nepal was simultaneously being developed as we were implementing this project. And so it was really hard to say, how are we influencing that system versus how is that system evolving over the first 10 years of implementing the Constitution? So that was a challenge for us. Another challenge is that obviously it's not a linear process. Things happen simultaneously. We see progress and then we see regression on certain issues. Successes happen in different areas of the project, and finding where we wanted to do deep dive on what successes are really meaningful was a challenge. It was just figuring out, okay, where do we look for impacts when we see a massive system that's being developed and changing over time? We're working within that changing system. Where do we begin to look for impacts when we say we want to do some deep dive into impacts? And so even identifying where to look was a challenge. We could go in any different direction. So selecting those required a lot of discussions with our research team, within our own team, with our partners on the ground, and it took a long time to really kind of land on the areas where we could focus to see where impacts are emerging. So I think those are some of the reasons why it's really difficult to tell a cohesive story and really explain, because you're working in so many different areas, simultaneously changes are happening and not happening. And so to say writ large, this is what's working, it's very difficult in a governance program like a subnational governance program.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. I'm wondering, Dr. Api or Lisa, would you like to respond to the same question about what made it so hard to explain the governance program that you've been working on?
Thank you. I might jump in, and good morning from USP. Pleasure to be here. I guess the first thing off the bat, what makes governance programs complex and hard to explain is everyone operates in their separate boxes. Everyone is unto themselves. And so when we look at governance, a lot of countries in the Pacific in particular have inherited systems from our colonial masters that were tailored for the 1960s and 70s. And we haven't really had a chance to reset and to reprioritize. And so with the work that we're doing with the Gov4Es program and supporting the change management, is having to take stock and map out the ecosystem, the governance ecosystem, the rural development ecosystem. And once that's mapped out, we need to reach out across the boxes and silos that inhibit the systems where we work in. So this need for integration is emerging as a key part of the work that we must do in order to build resilience, not just theoretically, but within our systems. Of course, there are different components. There's the political component, there's the policy component, there's leadership, government processes, NGOs, CSOs. And this is the thing which frustrates me, even within government, each ministry will have their own strategic plan that are isolated from other ministries. And then you have various sectors unto their own plan. So what the right hand of government does, or what the right hand of the system does, the left hand doesn't know. And this is where we need integration. And I'll conclude by saying this is just one activity, one effort in trying to bring about holistic change. It's a process, and I'm very grateful to the Gov4S program and all our donors for supporting this initiative, because for Fiji in particular, we haven't had a chance since becoming independent in the 1970s to review how we do business. It's just been government after government, 4-year cycles, couple of coups, political shocks, cyclones, and so on. So we need this time. And governance strengthening does take time. And it's hard to pinpoint one thing that's changing. So we need a systems approach, a systems lens, and to think systemically or systematically in order to bring about the change that will deliver sustainable development outcomes for our people. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Api. Okay, so we've sort of established that there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of issues around timeframes, and there's a lot of issues around externalities that affect the ways in which we are able to communicate what's going on in governance programs. But I think it's probably safe to say that we're all sort of part of that group who think that this is something that we can do a lot better, and that both of your programs have had a go at this. And so my next question, I'll start again with Carolyn, is, given how much of an important part M&E plays in this story, what sorts of things have you done to adjust your M&E, to change the approaches that you've had on the program over time to be able to enable you to tell a better story?
Thanks for that question. Broadly, remaining flexible, remaining open, not being too attached to one way of doing things has served us really well. So I would say from the beginning, we had sort of a more traditional list of indicators that we used, and being candid and being humble enough to say, like, this isn't working, or, these are actually giving us good information, but the ones that aren't, let's do away with them. And having a partner like DFAT was actually super important because they were very open to that process as well. So having that open dialogue, being open to changing things, mixing up quantitative, qualitative, deciding when each of those is useful and appropriate is important. The other thing we did was always use participatory approaches. We often use problem-driven analysis to figure out where do we direct our monitoring and evaluation, how do we shape our theory of change. It supported bringing the team together for those discussions, gave clarity and understanding within our own team. And then we also invited external perspectives. So I mentioned before we've had 2 external midterm reviews. We've also done a number of assessments and studies that we've commissioned through outsiders to give us what I think has been some of the most valuable insights about our evidence of outcomes. We also use strategy testing, which is one way of kind of reviewing our theory of change regularly, coming back and seeing what evidence do we have to say something is working, where do we want to make changes as we go. We also use biannual large-scale surveys, which we call our Survey of Nepali People, and that gives us a much bigger picture of what I would say is sort of the system in which we're operating. This is where we get perspectives of Nepali people about governance, and that helps us understand, what is the system we're operating within. It's sort of that outermost circle of the system of how do the people perceive governance. And that's been really useful. We also have specific indicator surveys that we've been collecting in the second phase. And I would say one other thing that we've been doing is considering how our M&E needs change from the beginning of the project to the end of the project. And we have always kept that in mind, that what we establish at the beginning does not necessarily reflect what's needed at the end. And so it's not something I've seen in a lot of other M&E plans, which is the temporal aspect of M&E. So you have like the first 2 years, which you really need to focus. Are we doing the right things? Are we seeing outputs? Are we actually, getting activities rolling? But by years 3 and 4, and then where we are now, which is 7 and 8, now is when we need to invest more in the impacts and understanding, like, where are we seeing the bigger changes. And this is when we initiated the partnership with La Trobe, and it was critical to conceptualizing how we understand our impact, where do we look for it, how do we assess it. So we used an approach that involved sort of 2 lines of inquiry. One, looking at it from the citizen angle, so how are people experiencing governance on the ground, and what does that look like to them? And then how do we tie that to what we've been doing? So going into the communities, meeting with citizens that have been impacted by changes in governance, what do they see as changes in governance in their communities? Where have they experienced those changes? Is it in access to health services? Is it in being part of planning processes? Is it that they have better communication with their politically elected leaders? Where are they seeing those changes? And then how does that tie back? So a separate line of inquiry on what have we done in those communities, and can we actually tie those 2 pieces together? So we used an interesting approach to kind of look at that through this research with La Trobe, and I think that's been really helpful. Again, that third-party perspective, that sort of outsider's perspective, has been really important for us, and continuing to invest in those types of studies and assessments is something that I would say complements a more holistic vision of M&E. It's not just a list of indicators. It's indicators, yes, and it's all the other things that go around it. It's the learning, it's the assessment, it's the analyzing. All of those things are part of an M&E plan. So taking that holistic approach has been, I think, good for our project.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. I'm wondering, Dr. Api, would you mind also responding to that question about the sorts of approaches that you've used to M&E, and how you've had to adjust those along the way?
Yeah, I mean, straight off the bat, a lot of the monitoring and evaluation tools are directed by either donors or the organizations. So straight off, with this project, we realized the need to flip the approach. For whom? And for whom is it designed for, and for whom will it benefit? And for whom are we working with? And so tweaking how we view this. And similar to the Nepali approach, a mixture of methods. For us in the Pacific, everything is relational, and it's based on conversational exchanges. And these are the tweaks that we are trying to do, changing the approach. Traditional M&E is not well suited to our system. So we need to review what indicators do we select, and how are we going to measure these, and across which dynamics are we going to end. At the end of the spectrum are the end users. What benefit can we accrue to our people in terms of development and resilience? So we can't just count activities as isolated cases. Again, to the point, we need to look at the broader system. Mapping the entire ecosystem is important because we understand the different stakeholders and actions and actors out there, and how we can intervene. And for us, we use this particular framework. It's based on the tourism resilience model. And for those of us in the audience who are resilience geeks like yours truly, you'll find the horizontal loop quite familiar. This is also known as the Hollings loop or the resilience loop. And society development practitioners have come to accept that this is how the world works, right? So we're in so take, for instance, COVID. COVID struck, it's the shock. But then very quickly, we try to reorganize, to bounce back to a former state. And then we will lead to growth, we'll consolidate, waiting for that next shock. And in the world of climate change that we've inherited, shocks are more volatile and more intense. So that's how we view life, and we view this, shocks and development in a continuous cycle. For us in Fiji and in the Pacific, we refuse to accept that this is the way things should be, because it doesn't give agency to people, to institutions, to the land, to government. And so that's what the horizontal loop represents. When we bring stakeholders together, when we integrate, when we speak to each other, when we plan together, or rather when we diagnose problems together, when we plan together and we implement together, then we have across the M&E spectrum sets of indicators that we can track together. And so hopefully and theoretically, the point of convergence is resilience building. When we are able to inform the reorganization phase as effectively as possible and as integrated an approach as possible, we'll be able to reorganize in a manner that ensures sustainable growth, and that when we anticipate the next shock, we will be in a better position. I don't like the term that's used by a lot of ecologists, bouncing back to a former state. That's what resilience is. No, we need to bounce forward. We need to build forward better. And there's no other way to do it than with an integrated approach, making sure that all voices are represented. And when all voices are sitting together and we're talking to each other, our indicators become more specific to the context, and we're all on the same, not just the same team, but we're all singing from the same song sheet. And the songs that we sing, there's a greater harmony. This model framework is what's guiding our work. And so action research is really at the core and heart of how we're operationalizing this framework, using local expertise, weaving in local voices, and with diverse stakeholders. We are planning together now, at least the first step. We're talking to each other now, which is something that we've not done in a long time. But we're starting to get the idea that when we are diagnosing problems together, when we are planning together, when we're setting benchmarks together, we'll be able to be in a more resilient form. And this is how we're planning to build resilience into the governance systems in Fiji and in the Pacific. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, yes. Just takes a moment to come to life. Thanks, Dr. Api. I just wondered maybe if I can come back to you straight away, looking at that diagram, that you've developed this quite innovative systems approach to considering your monitoring and evaluation on the program. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you applied that to the monitoring and evaluation approach on the program?
Well, for us, it's early days. We're working closely with Lisa and her team to embed and reform the M&E system. But I can talk a bit about how it's being implemented in two ministries. The Ministry of Fijian Affairs, which looks after native land and native people, and the Ministry of Rural Development. So right now we're going through this process of mapping out issues, problems, possible solutions, actors, and from there we are starting to think about what indicators are there. Of course, it's easy to just pull out a set of boxes that we need to tick, but it's training, building the capacity, lobbying and gaining support. That's sort of where we're at the moment, trying to get that buy-in from the development community to be able to then embed this in. It's a work in progress. I don't know if you can see, I'm quite young, but I've almost got a set of full gray hair that's come about from this work that Lisa and our team are doing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Carolyn, do you want to add? You've also developed some innovative approaches to tracking results on the program.
Yeah. I was just thinking about some of the concepts around impact and how do we understand impact, because where we are in this phase of the project, this is the big term that comes up all the time. It actually often instills a lot of anxiety of oh my God, impact has to be 10 years of implementation, it has to be something huge. It has to be like really meaningful. And when you're working on governance, it's really hard to say like we've impacted the entire system. And I think it puts a lot of pressure on us that we don't necessarily, doesn't really help us to figure out impact, as when we put so much pressure to say that impacts only happen in the long term, they also have to be these massive things. So a few things that we've done, I don't know how innovative these are, but really thinking about what should we be documenting as we go. And so there are oftentimes we are not sure what we're going to do with this evidence, but we feel like this is important right now. This is really meaningful in this moment. And so finding ways to document things as you go really helps in the long run, so that you actually have, when we looked back this year, we had something like 25 case stories that we've collected over the last years, which gives us quite a bit of evidence to look through and see, okay, now are there patterns emerging from these case stories? The fact that we collected them over time, we weren't exactly sure how these were going to be used, but to be able to go back now and say, what is emerging out of these case stories? How can we see like patterns or themes that are coming out of this? Is becoming a useful tool for us to now look at this impact. The other thing that we do is we keep going back to what is the impact on the people. So no matter what we're doing in governance, there should be some tie to how this is impacting people's lives. And that is, again, a helpful reminder to bring us back down to sort of that really ground level experience that people are having with governance, and whether it's service delivery or, what is that impact? Even if it's just, I feel more connected to my local leaders, that's really important. And that instills trust, and that instills like that, trust in the system. And so, looking at what is that link down to the people level has been really helpful as we move into this phase of really assessing and understanding impact of our projects. And there's something around this idea of, the term redundancy is coming to my mind, but how are you finding alternative ways to track things? So one example is we were looking at using data that comes from the government itself. They do these self-assessment scores, and that was one of our indicators. And that was a really useful tool for us, but then the government changed their approach to doing that. And then we realized, actually, the data is not that reliable. This doesn't really give us very good assessment. So how else can we do that? What are some backup options that we have to get sort of that same assessment? And so having those tools available to you to say, like, we may have missed this indicator, but what else can we do to get similar information? What is sort of our backup plan for those? And keeping those in mind as you go through is also helpful. Maybe not innovative, but really has been useful for us. So those are a few of the things that we've done.
Thanks, Carolyn. And another thing that you've done that we'll turn to now is this collaboration with Social Science Baha on looking back at the last 7-8 years of the program. So I'm going to turn over now to Jeevan, who's going to tell us a bit about that. Slides. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Okay, right. So, as Carolyn alluded earlier, we conducted this independent study with the University of Latrobe. Linda Kelly was the lead of this study, but we also, Social Science Baha collaborated with Latrobe University to conduct this independent study, which is entitled Stories of Change and Reform, Key Achievements in Australia's Long-Term Support to Better Governance in Nepal. So the objective of this study was to document or assess the changes that the local level following the implementation of federalism, and how communities have experienced governance at the local level. In order to understand that, we focus on 4 different themes. One was health services, the other one was judicial mechanism, and the next one was capacity building initiatives for the elected women officials, and the last one was economic livelihoods. But in the interest of time, we decided to present the findings based on 2 themes that we focused on. So we conducted this study in 4 different local governments of 4 different provinces in Nepal. If need be, I can come back to the details about how we selected this study later on. But let me go to the key findings of these capacity building initiatives for the elected women officials and how it has contributed at the community level. So as Carolyn mentioned earlier, Nepal entered into the federal system of governance after the 2015 constitutions of Nepal that offered kind of opportunity for the people, particularly those belonging to the marginalized groups like Dalits, Janajatis, and other marginalized groups in Nepal. So the constitution also mandated the mandatory representations in the 3 tiers of governments that Carolyn mentioned earlier, we looked at how different kind of initiatives that the Asia Foundation had carried out, and it might have some contributions on women's participation, representation, and empowerment as well. Based on the findings, obviously, before 2017, when we had the elections of 3 tiers of governments, these groups many of them did not have any experience about how to set the agenda, how to participate in the political process. Many of the people the women leader that we spoke to were very appreciative about the training that they received from one of your partners, many of your partners in different palikas, that they could gain some knowledge about where to intervene, basically, and they realized that they need to be participated in the very outset of the planning process so that they can allocate also budget, and they could also strategize their strategy, right? So we have this, at the local level, we have this 7-step planning process in Nepal, in which the federal government gives some caps to the local governments, and the local governments at the very settlement level, they start planning. So they're collecting demands for various projects and the programs. That's where these women political leaders started putting out their agenda for their constituency and their groups. And that's what they learned from this training. They didn't have that experience in the few years in the beginning, but later on they got very much involved in that process. And they also collected different priorities for their constituencies at the local level, and most of the agenda that they would provide would be for their groups and would be related to livelihood, capacity buildings, trainings of the marginalized groups. In order to do that, they will also refer to the constitutional provisions that have provided that guarantee of those services to these groups. And from the training, they would also develop some kind of network and coalitions among the women groups so that they could put forward their agenda. And many of the interlocutors that we spoke to also gave us some examples about how they could advocate policy and programs for their constituencies and how they could allot budget in the process as well. Whenever their demand was excluded or set aside, they would also make the local governments and the executive committee members accountable for that. And I myself spoke with many of them, and particularly the Dalit communities, which are called so-called untouchables in Nepal, they would feel discriminated by their fellow representatives themselves in the few years. But through the regular interactions that they had in this training, they shared that that tendency had reduced over the time. And it was quite powerful for many of them that they're, after the training and the knowledge, skills that they have gained, they're so much imbued to fight for the better positions in the local governments. Many of the local representatives that I spoke with, and many of them have also entered into some of the NGO work. Some of them have opted for the work in the private sector also. So that kind of benefits that they said that they have gained from these training. These are just two of the representative examples as to how they have benefited from the training that they have received, mentorship and the training that they have received. So one of the Dalit members in the local governments that we spoke with shared that, you know, she would learn where to engage and what point of planning process that she should engage, and how they could she could be able to secure some budget for the Dalit communities, which was not the case before that. Because that she represents their constituency, she could demand for programs for their constituencies. The second one is the quote from one of the other Dalit female representatives from Walling, Vimeshwar municipality, in which she would argue that, you know, it was her second term actually that she got elected. That was also kind of impact of the contributions maybe, because she had also received the training prior to that. And then she fought second term, and now she was in the local ward level representative. Now she's been represented in the executive level. Now she knows how the policy process proceeds, and where she can engage, and she was quite immersed to the process. So she said that, you know, I know the process and I could make some differences. However, she was also of the view that, given that she had the leadership, senior leadership from the same community, she was able to allot some budget and allot some, also set aside some budget for their community before, but which she doesn't have now, and she feels that she cannot, you know, really demand and push forward. Also, so the political opportunity structure also plays some roles in order to, you know, or to what extent they can come out of what they want. The next, it's not only the rosy picture that we wanted to portray. They also face several challenges in the process. Mostly the ward chairpersons, if you know Nepal, would be the ward chairperson would be the male members. So most of the demand that they put forward would be, the ward members tend to set aside or neglect, that they are less of importance. And I think this is the national disease in Nepal, that political parties and the leaders, they tend to focus on infrastructure building, whereas the women have different priorities. Women have different, the marginalized community had different priorities. So these agenda get less priority in the political process. That's what they mentioned. And one of the critical challenges that they face is the lack of the collective kind of forces among the female leadership also. That is, I mean, they have built some kind of coalition, but that tends to be diffused by the interest of the partisan politics. So they think that if they had better collective strategies and forces, then they would be in the better position to put forward their agenda. And in one of the palikas, particularly in Kailali, we noticed that, given that the training had been given at the later phase of that tenure, then they couldn't really utilize the skills that they have gained. So the other theme that we focused was on health, and we looked at how health services have improved and how the access to those services have improved post federalism. So many of the community people that we spoke to said that access to health care and has expanded and improved, and because the services are decentralized at the local level, that they've been also able to better access these services because they now have community health units and primary health centers at their vicinity. Prior to that, they would have to go to the district level, district headquarter level, to get many of these services. The fact that the local governments keep on conducting or carrying out local health camps on the periodic basis, they also carry out some health-related awareness activities that the community awareness about the health has also significantly improved. In some of the palikas, municipality, we also got to know that they conduct the screening of the cancer and gynecological issues, which was not the case prior to the federalism in Nepal. The access and the quality of the services is also improved because they have better governance system at the health facility level. We have health facility operation and management system, which is led by the ward chair, but other stakeholders in the municipality also participate in the planning process, monitoring process, as well as oversight process. And many of these local municipalities have established their own infrastructure, so which has reduced people's time to travel to the district level health facility to access the services. Two of the municipalities that we visited have also introduced health insurance particularly for the marginalized group, Dalit and women, in their constituencies, and we also for the persons with disability. So this is one of the examples about, illustrations quote from one of the interlocutors that we spoke with, the FGD participants that we spoke with. So before the federalism, they had to travel all the way to the district, far away, to get access to even the minor health services. But now that these services are available at their local level, they have benefited out of it. And they also, he also discussed about improvement in the services, infrastructures, availability of health workers in their health facilities. So because that, I think this is some of these are going to be repetitive, but the awareness about the health has improved because of post-federalism structure, and I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that because these health facilities are at the community level, they have frequent interface and interactions about the services and how they can be improved at the local level. And that because of that and the decentralized of the service has also made the services closer, quicker, and more reliable. People have more trust on the services of these institutions. In the health sector, we also identify some challenges facing communities, particularly still in some of the palikas like Bimosor and Waling, two of the municipalities. Geographical terrain, which makes it very difficult even today to travel to this health facility, so that constrain the access to the health service. In some of the health facilities, they still do not have proper birthing facilities and the availability of skilled birth attendants and other health officials, particularly in the smaller health units. So people tend to go to the private hospitals still. And some of the people also spoke about the challenges in terms of accessing these facilities because of the way that infrastructures have been built. They are not disability friendly. And in some of the health facilities, medicines are not available on time. In Nepal, after the constitutions, we have around 98 different medicines freely available, particularly for the marginalized groups. But they are not available on time because of procurement process also. So that's why people seem to also have less trust on these institutions, some of them. And in couple of municipalities, people were also of the view that because that you are not closer to the political parties, it's difficult to access these services on time also. So it's a political linkage that also seems to matter in some of these places. And in Janakpur and across the research site, we also heard from the marginalized groups like Musahar and Dalits that they don't have, the fact that they don't have participation and inclusion in the health operational management committees, that their issues and grievances are not so much addressed. Particularly in the case of persons with disability, they also have challenges in terms of accessing the information that is provided about the health. So one of the quotes that's been listed here clearly alludes to that, where information about the health camps and the other services are provided through the mics in the auto rickshaws, but for the blind people, it's with some health conditions, it's very difficult for them to access this information. And the FCSBs, who are the female volunteers, community health volunteers, are very critical in Nepal, providing information and some kind of immunization service in Nepal. But they are less paid, underpaid, and they are overburdened as well. So that's another challenge that was mentioned. Sorry, maybe I'm slightly over the time, but briefly, so in order to undertake this assessment, we followed the process tracing method. We conducted this study in 2 phases. In the first phase, we had the exploratory visit, in which we tried to validate some of our assumptions, and we also try to validate some of our questions. We also try to validate some of the research sites that we had identified, and we also try to map out who are the potential people, institutions, communities that we should spoke with. And then we came back to Kathmandu, and then we redesigned, adjusted our method, and we went for the actual fieldwork. We also did extensive review of the literature, laws, policies, programs, guidelines, including the program documents that was provided to us. We conducted 30 FGDs with community people at the local level, and the toll lane organizations that are quite prominent in the governance of informal governance of community issues. We conducted 57 key informant interviews with various stakeholders across these research sites. So I'll stop here, and if you have any question, I can come back to later. And I have Professor Linda, who would be also able to answer some of the questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jeevan. Given the time, I think we'll start to turn over to the audience for some questions. So we've been through some presentations on the 2 programs, both of which have struggled with and rethought how they're doing their monitoring and evaluation, and have come up with different approaches. They're both applying a systems lens and systems thinking to the programs that they're doing. And in this particular case, we've carried out a sort of separate research study to start to try and get to some of those quite granular results on the program. So now that you've heard all of that, let's get some questions from the audience. Okay, we have 1, 2, And I think there was maybe 3 over here. So let's start over here. Thank you. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Sure, thank you. My name's Lucinda. I actually work for the Australian Volunteers Program, but I volunteered in Nepal in 2018, 2019 at Dhulikhel Nagapalika. That helped them with their integrated urban development plan. One of the things that I and have continued to be involved in that space, and we've placed quite a few Australian urban planners into the municipalities to assist. One of the things that the issues that I see is that local government has been given so much responsibility after 2015, including urban planning, which is a massive change. And I think there's 2 municipalities that have urban planners out of 753. I stand to be corrected. But it's a big vulnerability I see in the system, particularly because in governance perspectives and issues around decisions about how land is used is enormously political. So I'm just wondering why, if that aspect has been considered at all, or if there is the potential for that sort of lens to apply in the future if this was to take a third phase or something like that. Because I know in most countries around the world, land is incredibly political, and the technicians who work in that space are very vulnerable. Yeah. If there are technicians in there, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, thank you. Alistair Fraser from SOAS. Thanks for all those presentations, they're really interesting. I had a couple of questions, one for each person, as it were. And I guess it's all wrapped up with how we started with this question of how do you tell stories? How do we detail impacts? I found in the first 2 presentations, it was really hard to get any sense of what the story was. They were very abstract in their descriptions, and so Jeevan coming onto a case study, I felt I had something to grip onto. And I guess there is a lesson in there, something about being as concrete as we can and avoiding abstract terms if we want to communicate impact. For Carolyn, you talked about a theory of change, that one way of assessing impact is to start with the theory of change and then think about it. And I never quite got an idea of what the theory of change was. And without that, I couldn't kind of grip what was going on. So what is the theory of change in this project? For Lisa, I seem to pick up that the theory of change had a lot to do with behavior change, and attitude change. You said that behavior change and attitude change have become more and more central. Whose behaviors and whose attitudes? And can you be concrete about that? You know, is it the part of the challenge of communicating these issues that non-national agencies attempting governance transformations is politically sensitive, a bit politically incorrect? If you're saying there are people in these countries who have the wrong attitudes and we need to change their attitudes, can you be as concrete? Is it just we're a bit embarrassed about saying that? But what are you actually talking about? Make it as concrete as possible. Sorry, I'm going on. But Jeevan, I have one final question, which was about this starting step 1 of your process trace with identify the change to be explained. I wondered if there's a risk. I really liked the model in general, I should say. But I wonder if there's a risk if you start by identifying the change to be explained, that we miss that many of the impacts of governance interventions are non-intentional. So you're picking out the thing that you're pleased about and you're going to explain. But if you start with what's changed since moment 1 of this project, we might pick up a bunch of things that are less welcome changes that might also have been driven by the project.
let's go for all of those questions. So, Jeevan, Carolyn, who wants to talk to the urban planning question? Do you want to have a bit of a go?
I can have a quick go. I think I met one of the volunteers who was based in Walling Municipality back when he was still there. So I remember meeting one of those volunteers. So it hasn't yet been like an issue that we've decided this is something we're going to focus on directly as a technical area, and I think in large part due to how political it is. There have been ways that we've worked on some of these issues indirectly, so one through some of the climate governance work that we've been taking on in the second phase, another through some of the work we've done on our economic governance, which also involves looking at how the local governments are developing land, and sometimes it's through public-private partnerships, sometimes it's through creating marketplaces that are more accessible or more centralized, but mostly it hasn't been a direct issue, and it's worth considering for the next phase. So I appreciate having that input and giving us something to think about of, this is a really relevant issue. On the theory of change, part of it is that it is broken down into a few different levels. And so what I put up was really just that initial level, which is, we're working on foundational elements of governance. And so we're assuming that if local governments have the access to the resources that they need to be able to take on their roles, take on their functions, their responsibilities, and they have those systems in place that they can work with, that they'll be able to make the decisions that are required for those municipalities. So we really take that approach that how are we enabling them to do their job by either providing some of those resources that they require, be it research, be it technical skills. It's really demand driven, which is also why it's difficult to tell the story, because one thing we've learned is that working in 7 municipalities, they're all completely different. They all have a different set of needs and different set of resources, and what the people bring to those municipalities who are in power is vastly different. And so saying like we just need to provide these things and the municipalities will flourish has never been something that we can get behind. So it really is this demand-driven, working with those municipalities and helping uncover through joint sort of problem discussion and not coming in with solutions in hand, but really working side by side as sort of thought partners and, providing whatever we can is part of the theory of change. So that's the underlying foundational. How do we do that bit? And then how do we tie that to those sectoral areas? So if they have those, then we assume that they can make the decisions they need to make for their municipalities. And if we focus on a few different technical sectors, then we'll see those decisions being lived out through better health services, through women's leadership, through some of these other technical areas where the services are actually provided. So we have we have the technical language and the diagrams behind the theory of change. I don't have it in front of me, but that's sort of to help give you a more concrete sense of what it is. But I definitely appreciate the fact that we talk in broad terms, and it's really hard to bring it down to that very specific level when you're trying to just describe this overall project. How do we put it into 2 or 3 sentences becomes very challenging. So, but thank you for the feedback on that. Okay.
Lisa, do you want to go ahead with the response to the question on behaviour change?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So this is the second time in a few months that I've needed to describe our program in 7 minutes or less. And I'm obviously still getting there in terms of nailing that. But as you mentioned, yes, it's a challenge. And as I mentioned at the start, it's a challenge that we've had across the program life. And to be honest, there's probably at least 6 different stories that I would be telling across a program that works in 6 different countries in the Pacific. And I guess as we kind of alluded to with the example from the Fiji change management story, there's stories within stories that we need to tell. On the behaviour change component, I think the main message there from the project learning perspective is that we realised for phase 1 and phase 2 of the project, we had been very much focusing on the technical components that we bring as a facilitator of, I guess, climate change and disaster risk mainstreaming and resilient development. What we discovered when we dug a bit deeper was that actually a lot of the project outcomes and, I guess, the impact that we were seeing was actually a lot more to do with the fact that we have very much built important relationships across the 6 countries that we're working in. And that our program and the people within it are quite values driven. And so we, I guess, wanted to be a lot more intentional about understanding that part of the program and bringing that to the fore. So again, I can't necessarily say whose behaviour and how it's changing. It's, again, a kind of plethora of behaviours. I think it's more the being intentional about that, particularly in a context of relationships being very important, where there is many traditional and cultural social dynamics that we are operating within, and being aware of that is really important. I might just see if Dr. Movono wants to add anything, particularly in terms of that systems thinking lens, particularly around that behaviour change component. Dr. Api.
Vinaka, thank you. And just very quickly, just to emphasize the importance of the context and the longitudinal history. For us in the Pacific, we are very young, only independent for 55 years. And been civilized or discovered for about 150 years. So a lot of our systems and the way we do business, our behavior, are influenced by these systems that we've inherited. So behavioral change, this is, I think, the biggest investment that we can make is in our people, to get to realize that we need to move beyond the boxes that we've inherited. And let me go out on a limb here and emphasize that a lot of our donors and our partners that come in, they come in with boxes that they expect us to fit in. This too needs to change, the behavioral change from the donors and for us who are implementing and the hands and feet, heart and soul of these change management processes. And it's work in progress. It's a negotiated process that we need to invest in. Project horizons, 4 years, 10 years, it's not enough. We need to invest in people so that these dynamic changes will result in actionable changes. And you tend to wonder why. I mean, we're just a couple of years before the UN SDGs expires. What's next? Why aren't we getting these results that we need? Why aren't our people progressing and developing sustainably? And I think it's one, we need to change how we behave, but we need to change how we deboxify our approaches. We need to do away with these boxes that we expect to fit people in. And so changing behaviors, I'm a local and I'm trying to convince my colleagues, look, this way is why we are where we are. And we need to behave in a certain way and change and adapt and be reflexive. A bit long-winded, but I hope that resonates with a response to your questions there.
Thanks very much, Dr. Api, and I love deboxify. I'm going to take that one with me. Over to you, Jeevan, to respond to the last question.
Thank you. Thank you for that very interesting question. Well, I also second with the earlier point about we need to invest in the people. And I can certainly relate to what you mentioned about the unintended question that program like this could have had. I'm sorry to say that we didn't have that had the exploration of the unintended impact that the program like this might have. However, I would like to mention here is that we were not looking for the good stories about the SNGP program. Basically, we had been there, independent, looking at these two themes: how services, access, quality have improved or not. What are the challenges that they faced? And it's not because only the SNGP is there. It's a whole lot of other things that are into the play. It's the constitution, it's the legal mandates, it's the role of the agencies, communities. So maybe it requires kind of counterfactual kind of study to come out with these kind of findings, which will be again very useful. One of the examples that I can give is that in Nepal, not only in the context that we went, but in Nepal, what happened right after the 2015 constitution was that many of the local governments were replicating the templates from one municipality to others without taking into account of the local context. So there might be instances like that might have some kind of negative or unintended consequences, but that I think needs more exploration, I think.
Thanks very much, Jeevan. And just I'm just going to editorialise slightly, mainly because I've also been very involved in the Stories of Change project as well. And one of the things we tried to do with that methodology was to say, okay, what sort of stories can we tell about the SNGP program when it's been going for, getting on for a decade? If we look back, because the reporting cycles have been at the project level, and so the outcomes, there's nothing that tells us what it all adds up to. But we can't just look back and say, well, what the program team has said they think the outcomes of it have been. We decided to do a sort of two-pronged approach where we have one piece of research that looks at what the program teams thought had been achieved, and another that says, okay, what sort of changes have occurred in the system that we might then see a line of sight between the two. And that's where the social science Baha piece of research comes in. And when we shift now to publishing this piece, we're kind of bringing those two stories together and trying to work out, well, what sort of connections can you say? And I think largely because of the size and scale of what we were able to do, we weren't really able to go and look at things where we didn't think stuff might have happened, So, but we see lots of bits and pieces of results in changes to the system, which for us is then really interesting in terms of, the size and scale of the sorts of things we might be able to say the program has contributed to. We have time for one more question. We have one right at the back there. Oh, sorry, we have two then. We're going to have time for two questions then, quickly.
Elizabeth St George, currently a MEL advisor for a couple of DFAT programs and formerly working on various different DFAT projects. The really interesting discussion, something that I have grappled with. I've always been most interested in monitoring and evaluation for governance programs, and then that contradiction of, well, how do you present results? So really interested the contrast there between sort of the general, we're working at a variety of different levels, we're responding to the local groups who all have different needs, which is really difficult to express. And for the naysayers, I'm very supportive of governance projects, but naysayers are very critical. And I also agree with the criticism with, well, hang on, what does that mean in real life for the person on the ground just because you've allowed their voice to be heard what improvement does that make, and how do you justify $50 million in funding to go in there? So I wanted to share one project I was engaged with, which is DFAT Gates Foundation work on health in the Philippines, but they've done it in a number of locations, and it basically flips it on its head. Instead of saying, oh, we're trying to expand voice, and then what does that mean? What it was we know that health funding is not going to the right places. We know that we need correct death certificates for that documentation to happen. Let us put in place support to get correct death certificates. And so then everything that goes around it, which is a whole lot of governance investment around training, around hospital management, around how does that information go into Parliament for budgeting to transfer, then there's a separate fund that goes to that. But they are clearly able to say, and I think everyone in the room understand, oh, we've done a governance project, we've improved this number of death certificates. So it becomes a really simple way of communication. So what I'm trying to get to there is there's a vertical way of doing it, or there's a horizontal way. The horizontal way is really difficult to communicate, but if you're working in a vertical, I want to achieve this. And I think we also came up with the theory of change program logic issue. I think we're really disserviced in government, in governance on the program logic, because quite often the end of program outcomes are around behaviour change, and we don't say, yeah, my end of program outcome is a 100% increase in death certificates, because it's seen as an output type of target that's quantitative and dismisses the amount of governance change that's happening underneath, but it's having an impact on the real lives of people in a particular area. So not so much a question, but a comment maybe.
Thank you very much. Look, we're going to call it to a close because we've been asked to finish exactly on time because there's only 45 minutes for lunch, so we'll have to take the last question in a chat after the session. But I'd just like to say a really big thank you to our 4 speakers, and thank you all for coming along as well. Thank you.